your Bibles, if you'll turn to 2 Kings chapter 6 this morning. When you read through the Bible, you'll come across many stories that stand out as your favorites. I'm sure we all have some stories where we say, oh yeah, that's my favorite story. It could be anything. Just pick one. I'm sure we all have some stories that we say are our favorites. But the ones that make the biggest impacts are the ones that there's a clear hero in the story. You know, you're reading through it, and then this hero comes out of nowhere. David takes down Goliath. You know, that's kind of a big one. You ask the kids, what's your favorite story? And David and Goliath rises to the top quickly because this teenager comes out and kills a giant with a stone. Hero comes out of nowhere. Daniel faces the lions and turns a nation back to God. That's kind of a big favorite. Noah saves mankind, kind of a doozy of a gift to mankind. You know, saves mankind by building an ark. Moses parts the Red Sea. These are the stories that we look at and we say, okay, there's a clear hero in that, and it's my favorite story because of this, that, or the other thing. All of these people take on hero status in our minds, or at least in mine they do. You see these people that are just people like we are, but they step up and God uses them in those roles. That's kind of big. One of the ones that just blows my mind is Moses going through the Red Sea. Nobody, he doesn't get to talk about all the people who have done this before. He's not going to talk about all the people who have experience with this kind of thing. You know, God's using him to walk through the middle of an ocean on dry ground, and there's an ocean on both sides of him. That would be a huge moment. So when I put myself in the place of that person in the Bible, I say that would be one of the big ones. And I see him as a hero. But there are people in the Bible who are basically unsung heroes. There's a lot of names that show up in the Bible and we don't know their names. Or there are a lot of people that show up in the Bible, we don't know their names at all. They're unsung heroes. This morning I want to bring your attention to 4 guys who remain nameless. We have no idea what these guys' names are. We only know about the one event in their life. We don't know about their past, and we don't know what happens to them after their story. We just know what happens to them in one story, in one little chapter of their life. That's all we get. But to me, these 4 guys stand out as some of the greatest heroes the Bible has to offer. And their story is a pretty simple story. These men do something that many people fail to even think about. So look at 2 Kings chapter 6. We'll start in verse 24. And it happened after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria, and indeed they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cab of dove droppings for 5 shekels of silver. Kind of a weird way to start a story, but there we are. You're welcome. Thanks for, I prefer the once upon a time start, but this one, we're just going to start like this. The Syrian army has just attacked Samaria during a famine, and the people were already going through some difficult times when Syria adds insult to injury. So they're already suffering a famine. They're already going through a rough time here. Now the people are so desperate for food that they're spending money on dove droppings. That's what we get at the very beginning of this. Like, okay, there's a famine in the land. Yes, and then Syria attacks Samaria, and now where are the people at? What are they going through? Well, it says right there that a cab of dove droppings was sold for 5 shekels of silver. Why would you want to buy that? These people are hungry. That right there should put us in that feeling right there is not a good one. Wow, the desperation of the people in this story. I mean, we kick off with, here's desperation. This is rough. These people are in distress. They have nothing. Before we look at the 4 heroes of the story, I want you to see the one man who had more than all the other people would have had. Look at verse 26. Then, as the king of Israel was passing by on a wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And he said, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I find help for you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" King Jehoram is the king. That's who we believe is the king in this story. And he wasn't a good man. He was very selfish. He wasn't a good man. When this woman cries out for help, his response is, if God won't help you, how am I supposed to help you? Real sensitive guy, real good guy. This woman has a problem as she's crying out for help. And her problem is a shocking problem. We already see this situation the whole city of Samaria is in. They're spending money on whatever they can find to eat. And it's a pretty desperate situation here. This woman's issue is a perfect description of what the entire nation of Israel was going through. What she's about to describe is going on in her own life. Her problem is it's a really good description of how desperate the people were. The king may not feel like he should hold the responsibility of helping her. And if God won't help you, how am I supposed to help you? What am I supposed to do? If God won't do it, then count me out. But he is curious about what her problem is. So he at least talks to her that long. Look at verse 28. Then the king said to her, what is troubling you? And she answered, this woman said to me, give your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, give your son that we may eat him. But she has hidden her son. This is the level of desperation these people are going through. This is not a bedtime story, so don't go home and share it with your kids. This is one of those stories like, I cannot believe that was recorded. We are seeing a situation where we're like, okay, they're spending their money on what? And now a little farther in the story, they're eating what? They're eating their own children. And there is a sense of mercy being shown even in this act that really upsets us to hear about. Why would you want your children to live in this kind of environment and you've got to survive anyway? This would be the mindset of a parent that goes to this extent. So you can have a little bit of compassion there, but at the same time, it hits us all wrong, and it should. They're eating their own children to survive. And even though Jehoram was a wicked king, this news was surprising to him too. That hits you hard. That news right there that's some big news. This woman clearly had a void in her life. She was suffering with hunger and with grief. At this point, Jehoram could have done something to help her, something. He is the king, but instead he becomes angry with God. That's the next move he makes. His personal situation wasn't at this level yet because it shocked him. It shocks him. He didn't offer any kindness. Instead, he decides to take it out on God. Look at verse 30. Now it happened when the king heard the words of this woman that he tore his clothes. And as he passed by on the wall, the people looked, and there underneath he had sackcloth on his body. Then he said, God, do so to me, and more also, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on him today. Jehoram blames God, and he plans to take it out on him the only way he can take it out on him. The king is now hunting down Elisha, the prophet. That's the spokesman for God. Let's go after Elisha. God informed Elisha about what was coming, though. God's really good like that. He lets Elisha know what's coming, and Elisha's prepared. When the king's messenger shows up, Elisha informs him about what God is about to do. God's not somewhere else. He's in the middle of this situation. We haven't read about that yet, but God's all about this. He's right in the middle of the situation with his people. So the messenger comes to talk to Elisha, or basically to arrest Elisha. And Elisha says, let me tell you what God's going to do. The people of Israel are suffering. They are seriously suffering. God had not forgotten them. But the mentality of the king and the messenger was part of the problem. They got themselves into this situation because of that kind of thinking right there. Let's forsake God. Let's turn away from God. And now we find ourselves in a situation which is not healthy. God was going to provide the solution. Elisha wants to tell them, God is still all over this. He's still going to provide the solution. Look at 2 Kings chapter 7 and verse 1. Then Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time a seah of flour or fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. So an officer on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God and said, look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be? And he said, in fact, you shall see it with your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. Elisha just told the king's messenger that he would see God completely turn this situation around by this time tomorrow. But the messenger told Elisha that would be impossible. Even if God could put windows in heaven, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Elisha said it was true, though. Israel was going to have more food than they knew what to do with by this time tomorrow. But the messenger is not going to get any of it. You're not going to get a chance to eat any of it. It's a pretty specific prophecy. And yes, it does sound impossible. Look at the situation the people are in right now. They're spending their money on doves droppings. They're eating their own children. And Elisha says, oh yeah, there's going to be plenty of food tomorrow. More food than they know what to do with it. You're not going to get a chance to eat it, but there's going to be plenty of food tomorrow. That does sound like a pretty specific prophecy, and it seems like a tall order, a really tall order. Oh yeah, it's over tomorrow. About this time tomorrow, no big deal. Sure. I can see why the messenger's like, all right, sure. Even if God were to just dump everything from heaven, this is not possible. But God has 4 heroes in the waiting. This is where the story becomes fascinating to me. These guys are what true heroes are made of. The nation of Israel was experiencing hardship. The heart of the king and his messenger were not in a place where they would be willing to help. They're not able to help. They're not willing to help. They're just mad at God and his prophet at this time. This is where a lot of people end up when they're going through hard times. We get mad at God. We get mad at God. God, you can fix this, right? Sure, I could. But you're not, so I'm going to take it out on you. That's what the king is doing in this story. He's taking it out on God. But 4 unlikely heroes stood outside the city gate with their own dilemma. Here's where these 4 guys come in. And I love these 4 guys in the Bible. I wish I did know their names, because when I said their names, you're like, oh yeah, I know that story. But they don't have names recorded, so I can't do that for you. But I do want to read the story of these 4 guys. Look at verse 3 of chapter 7. Now there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate. And they said to one another, why are we sitting here until we die? If we say we will enter into the city, the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. Now therefore, come, let us surrender to the army of the Syrians. If they keep us alive, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall only die. Well, they got a good plan here, right? Okay, if we stay here, we die. If we go into the city, we're going to die. If we surrender ourselves to the Syrians, probably going to die. Let's surrender to the Syrians. There's a large future ahead of these guys. We could choose death, or we could choose death, or we can take door number 3. Most likely death. Which one do you want to do? Let's go with door number 3. That death sounds more promising than the other 2. Let's go with that one. But these guys have the same problem everybody else has. They're starving to death, just like everybody else is starving to death. But their problem's a little more severe. These men are lepers. They're not only dealing with starvation, they're dealing with leprosy. They're banished from the rest of society because they're unclean. They have to stay away from everybody else. They have no place to call home, and they're separated from the ones they love. Their situation's a little more dire than everybody else's situation. Where are they supposed to get help from? The woman was at least able to go to the king and ask for help. Where did the lepers go? Where did they get help from? Their situation is darker than the other people's situation. These guys have a void in their lives too. So they talk among themselves and figure out what to do. They determine if we stay here, we die. If we go into the city, well, we die. If we surrender ourselves to Samaria or to Syrians, there's a chance we'll die, but there's also a small chance they might show mercy on us, and we might get something to eat. These guys have a problem, and there's really no good solution. They're just trying to find something, but there's no real good solution here. So they head off to the Syrian camp to see if they will live or die. That's the gamble. That's all they're going to find out. Are we going to live, or are we going to die? The only thing they've changed is the fact that in all situations they're going to die. The only thing they've changed was we could make that happen today. I mean, we don't have to wait for this. This could happen today. And they choose that door. Let's go check out the Syrian army and see what would happen. Look at verse 5. And they rose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. And when they had come to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots and the noise of horses, the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. Therefore they arose and fled at twilight and left the camp intact, their tents, their horses, and their donkeys, and they fled for their lives. Fantastic! These 4 lepers walk into a Syrian camp only to find out the gift of everything the Syrian army has was left there for them. They go, okay, let's surrender to the Assyrians. They go into the camp. There's nobody there. They look around. All the stuff's there. All the food's there. All their possessions are there. The army's not there. God had sent a noise so convincing that the Syrians thought they were being attacked. Thank you, Lord, for only what only you could have done. He sends a noise so they think the armies are approaching them, so they run away. They take off, leaving everything behind. Suddenly, the 4 most destitute men in this story are some of the wealthiest people on the planet. Just like that. 4 lepers, let's go die. Or we could live it up. We do have option number 4 now. The Syrian army's not here, but all the food's here. All the possessions are here. Everything's here, except for our enemies. That's the one piece in this puzzle that we're missing. Just moments before, they were approaching the camp with the fear that they might be killed, and now they're reveling in riches. Just that fast. The 4 lepers are enjoying everything. They're just living it up. Look at how they spend their time here. In verse 8. And when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they went into one tent and ate and drank and carried from it silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered in another tent and carried some from there also and went and hid it. These guys are finally living the dream. We know what the story looks like up to this point, and now things have just changed in a moment's time. They're living the dream. That morning, they carried a heavy burden. They were looking down the barrel of death itself. That's what their future looked like that morning. And then everything changed for them. Almost everything. Almost everything. They're still lepers. They didn't lose that. They're still lepers. Their situation is still bad. They still had the burden that they can't get rid of. They're going to die of leprosy. Even if the famine were over that day, these men were still carrying a death sentence. Their situation hasn't changed as far as death is approaching them quicker than it's approaching anybody else. With that thought in mind, look at what these 4 men do. Remember, they are still carrying the burden of leprosy. The rest of the people are not carrying this, but these four guys still have that burden on their shoulders. But they've now developed a new burden. When they walk into the Syrian camp, now they have a new burden. Their hearts are heavy in a brand new way. Look at verse 9. Then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This day is a day of good news, and we remain silent. If we wait until morning light, some punishment will come upon us. Now therefore, come, let us go and tell the king's household. So they went and called to the gatekeepers of the city and told them, saying, we went to the Syrian camp, and surprisingly no one was there, not a human sound, only horses and donkeys tied, and the tents intact. As these lepers were enjoying the blessings, they couldn't stop thinking about all the people who were struggling back in the city. That's impressive to me. These guys are in a situation where they can finally eat. Remember, they're not going to be the people with the 5 shekels that they can buy dove droppings. They're not the people that are in the situation where they have anything to eat. Now they have all they can eat. But they can't get their mind off of the fact that there's people struggling and suffering inside the city. Good for them. Good for them. Because those people have problems too. You got 4 lepers who haven't gotten rid of all their problems, eating and enjoying life, and all they can think about is there's other people suffering too. There's other people who need this. Yes, the lepers had it worse because they're going to die regardless of the blessings. But those other people were struggling in life too. So they get up and they go back to the city and they share the news. The famine is over. That's pretty good news. Hey, by the way, it's over. It's over. When the king hears the news, he doubts that it's true. Of course he does. Yeah, right. We've got plenty of food now? I don't think so. He sends out a spy to confirm that the story is true, and he finds out that it is a fact. The Syrian army's not there, but all their stuff's there. We are finally taken care of. And when the citizens of Samaria hear that the story is true, nothing's going to hold them back. Nothing's going to hold. There's food where? Nothing's going to hold these people back because they are starving. Look at verse 17. Now the king had appointed the officer on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. But the people trampled him in the gate, and he died just as the man of God had said, who spoke when the king came down to him. Elisha told that guy that by this time tomorrow there will be plenty of food to eat, but you're not going to get the chance to eat it. Because once the people found out that there's food, the stampede begins. And he gets trampled to death at the city gate. He doesn't get to taste one little bit of that food. To me, the most amazing part of this story is not the miracle of how God provided the food, but how the lepers provided the food. That's the part that, when I read this story, that's the part that chokes me up. That's the miraculous part to me. God can do all things, and his heart is good, and he will always do what's right. Mankind doesn't always operate that way. So when I read this story, the miracle that I see, they're both miracles, but the miracle of what God did to provide the food is one thing, but the miracle that 4 lepers made a decision themselves to share the blessings with other people when their situation was actually worse than the other people's situation. That's miraculous to me. These 4 guys that we will never know their names end up doing something that most people will not do. These men could have just taken what they wanted and walked away. But they couldn't get over the fact that there was suffering outside of their personal situation too. Other people are also suffering. Somehow, the other people's burden became a greater burden to them than their own burden. Catch that. Finally, they're eating something. But they've got a burden on their shoulders now that they can't take anymore. And why aren't you guys happy? What's going on? There's still people suffering. And we have the answer. We've got the food. We can't just stay here. We're not doing what's right. We've got to share the news. We've got to share the news. If you look at it through a personal lens, these guys had it worse than everybody else. They couldn't get rid of their problem. They still have leprosy. The food would bring hope to whoever had it, but it would bring the least amount of hope to these guys. Yeah, our belly's full, but we still have a death sentence. Now the other people, they could eat and take care of the starvation problem. So the least amount of hope goes to these guys. They had their own problems to deal with. Why are they suddenly concerned about the people in Samaria? Don't you have more problems on your plate than they have on theirs? Yeah, but we have more food on our plate than they have on theirs. So we've got to help them carry their burden. They've got a burden too, and we've got to help. So why are they so concerned about the people in Samaria? The reason's simple, and God tells us exactly what it is. Look at these 2 verses, John 16:33 and James 1:2. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. James 1:2, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. People carry burdens. Everyone will go through rough times in life. Everybody. We all get to carry burdens. These guys wanted to help carry those burdens. It could make a difference, and they wanted to. That's why I see these guys as heroes. We can do something. We can't do a lot, but we can do something. Lepers did not have a whole lot of opportunity to contribute to society because they had to stay outside of society. They had to stay outside the camp. They had to stay outside of the city. So they don't have a whole lot of opportunity to contribute to society. But when these four men realized that they could do something to help, they jumped at the opportunity. We can do something. We can finally do something. People were suffering, and they had a way to lessen the burden for those people. No matter how we look at it, in this world we will have tribulation, whether it's persecution or whether it's a situation like this, or what we are going to go through rough times. And people are going to fall into various trials. That's just what we get in the world that we live in. That's just the truth of it. And because of this, God gives us some instruction. This seems like a very, very simplistic idea, but I want you to see the solution for this. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. It's a pretty easy verse, isn't it? Pretty easy. This is one area people easily forget about when they're going through difficult times themselves. When I'm carrying burdens, when I'm going through a rough time, the natural thing isn't to think of, I wonder what everybody else is carrying right now. I wonder what they're going through right now. No, you're taking care of your own struggles. You're taking care of your own burdens. When we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, the last thing we're looking for is some additional weight to carry. Like, man, this is really rough. My life is really rough. I wonder if I could get a few more burdens to carry. I wonder if there's something out there that I can add to what I'm dealing with already. We don't think like that. No. We don't naturally go there. So what does God say? I want you to bear one another's burdens. Here's the secret. If I'm bearing your burden, and somebody else is bearing my burden, and somebody else is bearing their burden, aren't all of our burdens being taken care of? God didn't say, now take care of your burden and hope the best for the next guy. But it says, you take care of theirs. What about mine? I told somebody else to take care of yours. I told somebody else to be there for you too. But we don't think about that. When we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, we're not looking for more weight to carry. We're not looking at somebody else's burden. But somebody else may need help carrying their weight. Their burden, the burden that's on their shoulders, they may need some help. When these four lepers did what they did, they set the example we need to see in our lives and the example we need to see for others today. We need this. We really need this. One act of kindness changed the course of life for all of those people. One act of kindness can change the course of life for one person. Like, yeah, but I can't change somebody's life just by an act of kindness. Believe me, you can. Believe me, you can. I want to show you the New Testament passage which also describes what these lepers did. Now, a lot of times we say, oh, the Old Testament doesn't apply to us. By the way, it absolutely does. Amen. It carries your story. It carries a lot of your story. It applies to you. But a lot of times we look at the Old Testament stories and we can say, oh, yeah, I can find an application in there. But then we look at the New Testament and we say, now that one applies to us. So if that's the way you think, let's go ahead and take the New Testament and throw it on top of this Old Testament story so everybody can take it personally today. Look at the description in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 1. Therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any of affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, and of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also the interest of others. Well, there's a New Testament passage that shows us exactly what these four lepers did in the Old Testament. These guys could have had selfish ambitions. They could have done it. They could have only looked out for themselves. The opportunity was there. They could have made that choice. But they esteemed others better than themselves, just like it says to do in Philippians. That's what they did there. They were watching out for the needs of other people. Those people have a burden too. They have a burden too. We have a way to lessen the burden, so let's do it. They all four agree, let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, but those people don't hang out with us. They don't have anything to do with us. We're lepers. Yeah, but we can have something to do with them. We can help lessen the burden that they're carrying right now. So they decide to go ahead and do it. We know the backstory of how all those people got food. We just read it. We know how they got all that food. But I doubt the majority of those people ever heard. How did we get food? 4 lepers. No, they didn't get that version. They got the Syrian army, for some reason, left us all this stuff. That's really nice of them. Did you hear about the 4 lepers? I doubt the majority of these people heard about these 4 guys. We know how all these people of Samaria were fed. We know how they got the food, but I doubt they ever heard. These men didn't do it for credit or to better their own situation in any way. They did it because they could make a difference in somebody else's life for the better. That was their reason. We can make a difference. We can make a difference. I want to tell you something that happened to me this week. 10 years ago, on September 30th, 10 years ago, is when we lost our daughter, Kendall. I don't know what there's a magic about certain dates. You know, when that date rolls around again and you've lost somebody, everything, it kind of wakes up the whole moment once again. And I know I'm not the only one that feels that. You all understand that. That moment just kind of hits you all over again. So this past week, we were dealing with that. And a couple in our church called us up and said, hey, you want to go out to eat on September 30th? And why are you asking? We know what today is. We just want to know if you want to go out to eat. Why'd you mark your calendar for something that happened in our life? We just did it. And we know what today is, and we want to be a blessing to you. You know, we went out to eat with them. We didn't talk about the event that happened 10 years ago. We didn't say one word about it at all. We just sat there and had a good time with them. A lot of laughs, good food, good fellowship, and then we parted company. Let me tell you something that I have not experienced since September 30th. Grief. It's coming back around next year. And it might hit me several times the rest of this year. It could happen again. But the burden that I was carrying all the way up to that meal was taken off of me during that meal. Don't think that an act of kindness cannot take a burden off of somebody else's shoulders. It can change a life. By the way, I carried that burden all week long. That was Thursday. Was that Thursday? I don't know my calendar. Thursday was the 30th, right? Okay. So Thursday, I had no sermon, just to let you know what this week looked like. You're sitting here listening to one. I didn't have one. Because that burden was on me all week, and it's hard to write a sermon out when you're carrying a burden. But Thursday night, somebody came up and said, let's have it. Let's take the burden. We don't know all the answers. We just know there's something we can do to help. So they took the burden. On Friday, I woke up like, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Now I have a sermon. And there I went. Actually, this looks good. I type like this. I'm going. Somebody took the burden off of my shoulders. Somebody took the weight of the world off of me through an act of kindness. Don't ever believe that a small act of kindness won't change the difference for somebody in a big, big way. It might be a small little thing you can do, but you can change their life in a huge way. These four men should be held up in hero status, just like the other people we see in the Bible as heroes. Think about the one thing all these people have in common. Moses suffered many things and made many sacrifices to help the children of Israel. A whole lifetime worth. David is the one who took on Goliath in order to solve a problem for the rest of his family, the rest of his people. Esther risked her own life to save the life of others. These are the people we see as heroes. Heroes bear the burdens of other people. That's the simple definition. They carry the burden of somebody else. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the course of life for someone who is struggling. Believe me, I'm speaking from experience. This may seem like such a simple message today, but it's one that our culture has forgotten and needs to see. An act of kindness, just a small act of love, can change the chaos that we see in our world right now. Yeah, what I did was so small. Yeah, but you changed the world for somebody. Just with one act. One act. I just took them out to eat. How did that help? I don't know either. But it did. It did. Changed everything. Thursday, no sermon. Friday, on fire about one. What changed? Did God finally just open up heaven and drop it on me? Well, that happened Thursday night. You see this right here? Talk about that right there. And I was the recipient of this sermon. I just got it on Thursday. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. If I could accomplish anything for God, I want it to be his agenda. Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. When God's love is shown through your life, everything begins to change. Everything begins to change. In this life, there will be trials, there will be burdens, there will be suffering. Everywhere you look, people are in need of love and kindness. I didn't know how much I was in need of it. But once it showed up, the burden was lifted. I'm like, that was everything. That meant everything. The whole world seems to be broken right now. So change it. Change it. That's the simple message today. Change it. How am I supposed to do that? I don't know. Help them load the groceries in their car. Tell them God loves them today. Carry an umbrella for them while you're getting soaked. Change it. Go ahead and change this broken world. You can do it, and I can do it. And one act of kindness at a time. Just change it. One act of love can change a life. It really can change a life. And I'm not just throwing out some proverb to you. I'm telling you what happened to me this week. It changed everything for me. If God is truly the answer for a broken world, and we believe he is, we truly believe that God is the answer for our broken world, then let the world see him through you. Let the world see him. The world is full of people who feel they have to carry burdens alone. So many people out there feel like they need to carry the burdens alone. And even if it's just the smallest way, it may be something huge for the person you show kindness to. You can change everything. One act. One act can change everything for that person that was carrying so much. People often feel that their burdens are theirs to carry alone. So change it. Change it. Yeah, but what if I'm dealing with leprosy? Feed them. If my problems are more than their problems, don't worry. Somebody will show up and they'll help you carry yours too. The world's broken right now. It's really, really broken right now. I want to emphasize that in a greater way. It's shattered right now. A lot of people feel like they need to carry their burdens alone. So why don't you walk up to them and go ahead and change that feeling? I don't have to carry it alone. You're there with me. You're there with me. the world needs to see God's love. And the only way they're going to see it is through your life and my life. So let's go ahead and change the world. That's my only challenge to you today. A lot of times you go to church and say, I want a challenge today. The only challenge I'm going to tell you right now is go change the world. That's it. Just that one little thing. Go change the world. We've got to do it together. Go out there and bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ.